Hi all, and welcome to another week of the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. That was THI's special tribute to the passing of Mrs. Crowley this week. Yes, Barbara Bush. As far as I'm concerned, both her and her husband died quite a long time ago. Well, certainly a few years ago anyway. But they have ways of playing their games with time and using events for distraction. Anyway, it's no loss to us. Time moves on, and so do we, and so does the show. We have some intel tonight. It's interesting. Yes, it's interesting. We have a number of the usual op-ed pieces. Some of it unpleasant. There's a lot of unpleasantness going on at the moment, and some of it hopeful and positive. So it was quite a mixed bag this evening with the usual news and views. And if we have time at the end, we'll do the usual questions and answers. Right, let's get into the details of the show. If you want to listen live, you can go to www.spreaker.com/user 8955881. And you can also listen live and also to the archives on thinkdifferent.thepeoplesclub.org. Some of the biggest shows, if you're new to the show, is under Must Listen. And if you listen to them in order, you get the essence of what this show's all about, and you can catch up. There's also a lot of articles of Chloe's on there about self-empowerment, grounding, centering and shielding, which is important at this time. There's a lot of fun and games going on. There's a lot of messing with people and psychic attacks, etc., etc. So, we did those documents for your benefit. Use them. That's what they're there for. We have the Facebook page, Truth, Honour and Integrity, and the Facebook social media alternative page, which is now catching on, given all the shenanigans with Facebook, in MeWe, that's mewe.com. And if you are having difficulty finding it, send an email, which is also the email for the show. If you want to send questions or comments in, and that's truth.honor.and.integrity@gmail.com. And remember, honour is spelt the American way, not the European way with the U. And we also have the People's Club donations website link and everything to do with the foundation at thepeoplesclub.org. Right. Barbara Bush went, like I said, no loss. Well, the community lost somebody this week, last Friday. Some will see it as kind of the grandfather of the alternative media in many ways. And sadly, Art Bell died last Friday. Of course, Mr. Bell even appeared on mainstream TV back in 1999 with an interview with Larry King, of all people. And he often displayed an even-keeled tone and made his, what is quite frankly, it's off the wall, some of the stuff we cover and go through. And yet, some of us are able to put it across in a manner that appears reasonable, and he was certainly one of them, unlike Mr. Jones. Kind of rants down your ear and doesn't solve anything. But one of the things he said to Larry King is, people are always demanding proof, but these things are not easily proven. Yes, indeed, Mr. Bell. We thank you for your time educating the masses and bringing forward topics that were once closed off. It's just sad to see how your show, Coast to Coast, was taken over by the covens and the fraud that is George Noory. But we should remember Art Bell. He did a lot for the to kick off the alternative media at the beginning. Right. Oh boy, that ends it. It's going to be fun. Let's get into, some will say is the boring part, the news and views, some generally around the world, but tends to focus a lot in America because that's where the main battlefield is playing out, although all 209 countries are involved in it. And the first thing we're going to go to is Washington, and the Justice Department's Inspector General referred its findings on former FBI Director Andrew McCabe to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington for possible criminal charges this week associated with lying to internal investigators, amongst other things. And I will caution at this point, there's no guarantees of charges being levelled, as it was made clear that prosecutors can and may decline to prosecute. Time will tell. Now, last week, the Inspector General issued a report finding that Mr. McCabe lacked candour on at least 4 occasions with internal investigators when discussing a Wall Street Journal article about the FBI's Clinton Foundation investigation. In addition, the Inspector General determined that Mr. McCabe was not authorised. Excuse me. Mr. McCabe was not authorised to disclose the existence of the investigation because it was not within the department's public interest. There's that national security cop-out again. And the disclosure to the Journal was made in a manner designed to advance Mr. McCabe's personal interests at the expense of department leadership. So we'll see how that unfolds. There's more than one investigation going on, as we will find out during the course of this show. And the Justice Department today will hand off a congressional committee's the controversial memos of James Comey, used to document meetings with President Trump, and a congressional source told Fox News the memos will be turned over to the House Judiciary Committee this evening, following threats from committee chairman Bob Goodlatte, Republican in Virginia, to subpoena Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, TikTok, for failing to meet the deadline to submit the documents. Now, the Justice Department officials confirmed to Fox News that they anticipated they will provide the relevant congressional committees access to the Comey memos, and specifically to the committees which have requested them. Now, Mr. Goodlatte, House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy, and also House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes had set the deadline for the Justice Department to turn over the Comey memos last Monday. Now, back in February, the federal judge James E. Boasberg ruled that Comey's memos would not be made public. That's about to change, as they were more likely to interfere with the special counsel Robert Mueller's ongoing investigations into the 2016 presidential race. I don't think that's going to work anymore. But, you know, is it just me, or I seem to have heard numerous times that Trump had been absolved in any Russian election meddling on more than one occasion, and that this issue just seems to keep rolling on and on. And yet you wonder why, when the real meddling took place in American elections back in the year 2000, this level of inquiry never took place then or since. What's the difference? Indeed. For those of you with rather long memories, back in Cosmic Voice, I mentioned that North and South Korea would reunificate. and people thought it was a bit off at the time. Well, when you look back at what's happened this week, meetings with Mr. Kim Jong-un, and how it's progressing, and also the talks between the North and South is progressing. I don't think that comment from, must have been 2 years ago now, is as far-fetched as it seemed. Now, what's transpired this week is North Korea has expressed its commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So that means North and South. Bear that in mind. And currently has not attached any conditions to it. And this came from the South Korea president this morning, in fact. But Washington still remains wary and has vowed to maintain maximum pressure on Pyongyang. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in said agreements about denuclearization, establishing a peace regime and a normalization of relations between the Koreas and the United States should not be difficult to reach through a North-South summit which takes place next week, and a later summit planned between the North Korea leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump. I think they've already spoken a lot more than people realise. Mr. Moon said, I don't think denuclearization has different meanings for South and the North Korea. The North is expressing a will for a complete denuclearization. And Mr. Moon said during a lunch with chief executives of Korean media companies that Mr. Kim would step down with the nuclear weapons. That's a bigger story than people realise. Like I said, I mentioned about Korea heading towards reunification 2 years ago. South Korea is run by the cabal. It has nuclear weapons. So if one has to get rid of them, so do both. And that also means if North and South are reunificating, an end to the cabal influence in South Korea. It's a bigger story than perhaps most people realise. Show cutting out, no surprise. I came across an article over the weekend. Thankfully, I did a fair portion of the show over the weekend, and some of the later op-ed pieces will reflect that time, but also the updates that followed. I've had a rather busy week, work-wise, and Bon Jovi concert last night, so it took a fair chunk out of my week. But I came across this particular item, and it's becoming a rising concern, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and hopefully it will. But the issue of rising house prices and rents in selective areas. I know it's not across the board, it's just in selective areas. And I do mean selective for a reason. Now, for the American listeners, it's already been highlighted of major issues surrounding California and San Francisco. But issues in Chicago, New York and Connecticut are also prevalent. On the other side, you have whole towns turning into ghettos or ghost towns like Detroit and the other manufacturing cities. But these issues are not just ascribed to America alone. And the article I read this week was about major issues in Sydney and Melbourne in Australia. And where it's only the very rich or the debt-laden so-called middle class who are able to live in a home of reasonable surroundings. So I checked out some of the average prices for these particular regions. Sydney, $682,000. Melbourne, $560,000. Los Angeles, $521,000. New York, $475,000. Manhattan, $1.3 million. Shanghai, $660,000. London, $670,000. Auckland in New Zealand, $675,000. Tokyo, and this was the 2016 data, so it's not been updated, $335,000. And Hong Kong, $1.86 million. I mean, how can anybody afford those homes with pay less than $30 an hour? Which is for the vast majority of people, with whole chunks of people being paid between $9 and $15 an hour, and some even less. Now, I could mention a number of other locations like Paris, Berlin, Rome, Abu Dhabi, Jerusalem, South Africa as well. But the question is this a deliberate ploy on behalf of global elites to force the useless, money-starved people away from pre-selected areas so they can live their self-serving lives away from the so-called rabble of society? It's easily done. But the key is what happens if they accomplish it? Could they possibly wall off the city like Westworld? Or dome all of the cities further so no intrusion is allowed by the lower classes? What happens then? Well, technically they've already showed you how they could possibly accomplish it with the movie series The Hunger Games, have they not? And the question is this the world that we wanted? It's a rising and creeping problem where people are being forced out of certain geographical regions so that only the rich and elites can afford to stay there. California's the most obvious example. I warned of that 3 or 4 years ago. They were emptying it out for a certain reason. Also in the news this week, President Trump, I did forget to follow up on this, was expected to, and in the end did, pardon Scooter Libby, who's the former chief of staff to the then Vice President, Dick Cheney. Now, the President has reportedly already signed off on the pardon, which he did, and Mr. Libby was convicted in 2007 for also lying to the FBI. Everyone loves lying to the FBI. And apparently he was obstructing justice into the investigation as to who leaked the identity of the ex-CIA agent Valerie Plame. Remember all that? Some of you may not. For those of you who've been in it longer, you'll remember the furore surrounding that. It's funny how everyone is protective of CIA agents, is it not? Perhaps it's not funny. Well, I don't think it is anyway. But a big furore over the identity of a CIA agent. And yeah, the cover-up of pedophilia, satanic rituals goes on. But heaven forbid you out a CIA agent. Oh, that's not allowed. Anyway, multiple people at the time had claimed that Libby leaked Plame's identity to them after he had publicly stated he was not the source of the information. former President George W. Bush commuted Libby's subsequent 30-month prison sentence, but did not pardon him at the time. Now, Libby marks Mr. Trump's second pardon of what is deemed as a controversial figure since he took office. He also pardoned former Sheriff Joe Arpaio last August after the former Maricopa County sheriff had been found guilty of contempt of court after a Justice Department investigation found he racially profiled Latinos. Boo. Household debt. Sadly, it appears after it was going down quite considerably, and we did announce that in the show last year, I think. But it's creeping back up again, which is not a good sign. And the category that includes mortgages, student loans and car loans, along with credit card and other debt, which had dipped in the wake of the Great Recession, which still hasn't ended, despite what they tell you. But over the last few years has been rebounding steadily. Overall, America's debt hit a new high of 13 trillion last year, surpassing the previous records set in 2008 by 280 billion. And as it turns out, people's peak earning years also appear to be their peak debt years. Think that's a coincidence? No, it's not. And people between the ages of 45 and 54 reported the highest levels of debt overall, totaling $134,600. And those in the 35 to 44 age bracket was the second largest amount at $133,000, and pretty much overall the under 35s are 67,500 in debt, 35 to 44 133,000, 45 to 54 135,000, 55 to 64 108,000, 65 to 74 66, and 75 years and up 35,000. You know, most people age 75 and up have worked most of their lives and yet still carry debt on average of 35,000. Something's not right somewhere. And yes, we've been duped into the materialistic consumerism. It's still part of the game. This will kind of disturb you. I was both surprised, but not so sure it's going to be too appetizing for some. Layers of squirming black soldier fly larvae fill large aluminum bins stacked 10 high in a warehouse outside of Vancouver. They are feeding on stale bread, rotten mangoes, overripe cantaloupe and squishy zucchini. But this is not an actual garbage dump, it's an actual farm. Entera Feed, one of the emerging crop of insect growers that process the bugs into protein-rich food for fish, poultry, and even pets. Oops. After being fattened up, the fly larvae will be roasted, dried, and bagged or pressed to extract oils, then milled into a brown powder that smells like roasted peanuts. That's just put people off roasted peanuts. What if it's black fly, soldier fly larvae? Now, this particular small but growing insect farming sector has captured attention and investments from some heavyweights in the $400 billion a year animal feed business, including US agricultural powerhouse Cargill, feed supplier and farm products and services company Wilbur Ellis, and Swiss-based Bühler Group, which makes crop processing machinery. Here's the next part you won't like. Fast food giant McDonald's is studying using the insects for chicken feed to reduce reliance on soy protein. Oh dear. Black soldier fly larva. It's finger licking good. Oh dear. Oh. The IMF. We're going to have some news on the IMF shortly. Anyway, they've put a forecast out for 2018. Will be, according to them, the strongest year for global growth since 2011. Will be if the trust accounts gets released properly. In its new assessment of the world economic outlook, the IMF predicts growth this year and next of 3.9%. However, it warned that performance could be curtailed by trade barriers. Now, it actually gets curtailed by IMF, the UN and the World Bank, but there you go. For the UK, the IMF has made a modest upgrade for growth this year to 1.6%. I wouldn't call that growth, but there you go. Not considering we've been in recession for 10 years. For next year, the forecast has been slightly reduced for the UK down to 1.5%. So how's that growth? That's recession time. And the IMF report warned that the current momentum was not assured. Go figure. It lists a number of risks that could lead to weaker performance than its main forecast, including what it calls policies that harm international trade. And the report refers to a waning support for global integration, and it says increased trade barriers, tariffs or other restrictions could harm sentiment in financial markets. It could also disrupt global supply chains and slow the spread of new technology. They're having a laugh, aren't they? Protectionism also affects consumers by making tradable goods more expensive. So can corporate thieves. There you go. Where are we? Are we for time? So this is a follow-up. US officials have held direct talks with North Korea to set up an historic summit with Donald Trump. And they announced we have had direct talks at extremely high levels, he said, adding that 5 locations were being considered for the Kim Jong-un meeting. And he was speaking as he hosted Japan Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Florida. Mr. Abe commended the US president's courage in agreeing to meet the North Korean leader. But there had been fears in Tokyo that Mr. Trump's plans for bilateral talks could sideline Japan, a key US ally and neighbour of North Korea. Well, Japan has to clean their act up also, because Japan, like South Korea, is a cabal, or was cabal, stronghold. These are the last 2 on the news items before we have a musical break, and they're both rather positive and another victory in a way for the alternative media, for all of us that have exposed certain things. Well, this was announced yesterday, and it says as follows: today we won a victory in the fight against radiation in New Mexico. The Public Regulation Commission has denied PNM's application for smart meters in New Mexico. The plan presented in the application does not provide a net public benefit and does not promote the public interest, wrote the Commission. And the Commission accepted the hearing's examiner's recommended decision without alteration. And it ruled as follows: PNM did not demonstrate that smart meters will save money. PNM did not demonstrate that smart meters will produce energy efficiency. PNM did not show that customers want smart meters. PNM did not evaluate alternatives, and PNM did not say how it would protect customer data privacy. Cybersecurity issues needed to be addressed, and 125 good high-paying jobs would be lost, and proposed opt-out fees were considered highly unreasonable. There was insufficient public input into the decision, and there was insufficient response by PNM to public objections. The evidence about health effects was discussed at length during the Commission, and customers who have strong feelings about the health effects of the meters should be allowed to protect their stated health concerns without a prohibitively high cost. The decision means there will be no smart meters in the near future in New Mexico's metropolitan areas, which includes Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Las Vegas, Clayton, Ruidoso, Tularosa, Alamogordo, Silver City, Lordsburg, and Deming. I hope other states follow that path and have them either blocked or removed. Sadly, my synth of a sister decided to volunteer for one in the UK. See, you just can't help some people. But there you go. But they save money. Yeah, they also kill you. Then you'll save all the money you like. Or perhaps you won't. Another thing that's been highlighted has come to a successful conclusion as well. Durham City Council in North Carolina has voted to abolish international exchanges with Israel, under which officers received military-style training. Oops. The council wants to prevent the militarization of law enforcement, and late on Monday, after a heated debate in the city council, the members voted 6-0 in what one of the activist groups, Jewish Voice for Peace, described as the first city to prohibit police exchanges with Israel. The group was one of those which pushed forward the move, together with the Durham to Palestine Coalition, a movement opposing police militarization in the United States and calling to stop supporting human rights abuses in Israel. The activists launched a petition in fall of last year demanding that the city authorities immediately halt any such partnerships with Israeli forces, and the council opposes international exchanges with any country in which Durham officers receive military-style training, since such exchanges do not support the kind of policing we want here in the city of Durham. So that's two examples of people power and largely the alternative media. Like we've always said, it's the people who have the power. We've just forgotten we have it. And if sufficient pressure is put on, even more so now than in the past, you can have things stopped. Look at how many countries have banned Monsanto. Again, that all started from the alternative media. Look at how the exposure of church and state with pedophilia all came from the alternative media. People deciding they'd have enough of lies and false narrative and stood up. It's all we had to do at the end of the day. Right, do I cover this now? Yes, I will. This is one of the op-ed pieces that I was going to open with tonight, and it kind of highlights certain things, highlights a lot of things, gives a lot of people a lot of pondering, and also highlights the volume of information that is being covered. Because I do think we forget at times how far we've come. And people still insisting nothing's happening. But the highs and lows of being a radio show host and a speaker is 1 minute you're up and the next minute you're down. It depends on a lot on the information that comes in. The roller coaster ride that I predicted back in 2015 is on TR3B mode currently, as many will have decided for themselves. And sometimes it's a case of 1 or 2 steps forward, and what appears to always follow is 1 or 2 steps back, it seems. Now, I did pieces recently about proof and truth, and how no matter how much of it is given, sometimes it's never enough to some people. And yet we wonder how much utter shite they will allow or easily accept will also be never enough for the many. Now, tonight's show has so many possibilities of which way to go or which news to cover. Do we cover Trump's increasing allegations against him? Do we cover the latest hiring firings? Do we cover the rifts, the skullduggery, the propaganda, the actions of ill repute, and the mudslinging of both the FBI and the CIA? Do we cover peace treaties? Do we cover sovereignty? Do we cover the Sangreal? Do we cover the high-speed rail? Do we cover the Rod's stabilisation of the planet? Or perhaps we should cover Stormy Daniels, James Comey, John McCain, Paul Ryan, Trey Gowdy and his flip-flopping, Anne joining a coven, or the Scooter Libby pardoning. Do we cover memos, leaks, emails, server issues? Do we cover he said, she said, whether Black Lives Matter or all lives matter? Do we cover alleged Russian meddling in all things from elections, poisonings, Middle East, or anything else that can be pinned on them? Perhaps it was the Russians who messed with a former member's website and not me in the past week. Blame them. Do we cover UK crimes and the soaring death rate? Do we cover trust accounts being released? Or do we cover the now hundreds of CEOs, presidents, directors, politicians, bankers being fired, resigned, or not running again? Do we cover the SS small p being dismantled? Do we cover the alternative media also being dismantled? Alternative media personalities being exposed? Do we cover followers of personalities defending their sources of knowledge in spite of, in some cases, proven allegations against them? Do we cover radio show hosts ignoring all previous allegations and continuing to carry on hosting that personality for the sake of his show and standing, and then refusing to speak to this host who warned him well over a year ago? Do we cover the latest frequencies, the ongoing exposure and arrests of pedos? But curiously ask, why are the bigger names still walking amongst us? Do we cover the Manor World Holding Trust, Kim, sovereignty, trust accounts, or the 489 aspects of life under review for radical improvement? Do we cover Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan? Do we cover time loops in general, or look at the time loop this week? Remission accomplished. Or do we cover the war, drugs, opioid crisis, sex industry, slavery, human trafficking, harvesting, organ harvesting, ritual abuse, torture, or adrenochrome? Do we cover failed RVs, Chinese elders, Rothschilds, Bush cartel, Clinton Foundation issues? Do we cover Parklands and the fact that the cop in that region who spoke out against it mysteriously died last week, aged 42, with no health issues? Do we cover Las Vegas still? What about Sandy Hook, the Pulse shooting? Or do we cover issues surrounding Debbie Wasserman Schultz or Huma Abedin? Because if rumours surrounding her and Anne in a video are correct, the public must take actions. Do we cover ongoing issues of chemtrails, vaccines, homelessness, poverty or foreclosures? Do we cover SES, Serco, Blackwater or Z? Do we cover abuses of cops, lawyers, judges, agencies, politicians and military, and how they flagrantly break all laws and yet carry on like nothing happened? Do we cover the synth crisis, the data stealing crisis of Facebook, Google and Twitter? Do we cover that large chain stores are closing down and collapsing at an alarming rate? Or do we cover the fact that in the week of discussing food stamp reductions for the American people have just paid $160 million to send 120 Tomahawk and other missiles to a country that hasn't attacked it or its people? Bear with me on that. Or do we cover most of them failed to hit their target? Or do we cover White House stating its goal to end ISIS, but just wanted to carry on and remind Assad, who's the boss, at our expense? Why didn't Russia, China, India, Pakistan, UK or France pay for and carry out the Syria operation? Why does it always have to be the American people who have to fund this shit and then face the barrage of abuse and ridicule from people all around the world? Do we cover that? Do we cover 17 years in Afghanistan and mission not accomplished? Do we cover the convenient sidestepping of the Nazi base in Virginia when all focus is finally on the giant elephant in the room, suddenly being sidetracked onto everything not Langley? Do we cover time loops, two worlds, masks of illusion, the council, ETs past, present and future? Do we cover grounding, shielding, centering, self-empowerment, shadow work, inner works, energy centres, psychic and energy attacks, how to be better, how to be calm, how to be balanced, how to be service for self, to be of service to others? I could go on, and maybe some will realise how much this show does cover, and all free of charge. We may not get everything right, but what I do is I strive to do is provide a largely overview look at many things around the world and provide clarity where possible. giving hints where possible of what to look for and what to expect, provoke ponderings to make you expand your own thinking, consciousness and understanding, preferably in a rational, calm and balanced way, so that all levels of learning have a hope of getting their heads around what is a monumental mess. I suspect one day there will be a aha moment for some in our group and many outside of it, and look back at how much we have covered in our shows and also how much got validated. It is now noticeable, clearly noticeable to a number of members, how much of our show has been lifted from and transplanted into many blogs, forums and shows. And from my perspective, at least the information's getting out. That's more important than who delivered it to me. So I hope you realise there's a lot to cover. A lot has been covered and to keep up with. And perhaps people should remember that with the questions for the show. I do have a full-time job on top of all this, and there's nothing worse than putting out stuff numerous times in the shows and have people ask the same question over and over. The shows are not for my benefit, they're for yours. How much you learn or retain is ultimately down to you. We're going to have a music break now, and we're going to come back with some intel. Perhaps the title of this song will be telling. Bring it on. Hi all and welcome back. A short music break. Just the one song by Rachel Keys, called Bring It On. And if memory serves me correctly, though it's been a bit scrambled this week with so much going on, I think that was the daughter of one of the members. Shout out if it was you that sent it. I know somebody sent me it, but I get sent all kinds of things, and most times I can remember, but not always. Bring it on. Which part do we go with? Let's get this Syria thing out the way, and then I'm going to go into the intel. Now, you got to remember, this was written on Saturday, so it's fairly fresh, and at that point, certain intel hadn't come in. So, for those of you who like to react any criticism of Mr. Trump, please bear with me. I still have to call things as it is, as we see it. And this is the difficulty we face at the moment for those of us who are in the information stream. But I always provide balance. And my reaction to what took place in Syria basically caused this piece. Now, a quote: who said the following back in 2013? We should stay the hell out of Syria. The rebels are just as bad as the regime. Answer: zero. Who said in March this year, we will pull troops out of Syria? That was Mr. Trump on both accounts. And yet, by mid-February, Trump was telling his top aides in meetings that as soon as victory could be declared against ISIS, ISIL, or whatever other name they come up with these days, he wanted American troops out of Syria, which then set off alarm bells in the State Department and also the Pentagon. where officials have been planning for a gradual, methodical shift from a military-led operation to a diplomatic mission to start rebuilding basic infrastructure like roads and sewers in a war-racked country. So, in one sign that Trump is serious about reversing course and withdrawing from Syria, the White House this week put on hold some $200 million in US funding for stabilization projects in Syria. The money was to have been spent by the State Department for infrastructure projects like power, water and roads, and had been announced by the outgoing Secretary of State Rex Tillerson at an aid conference last month in Kuwait. So, my opinion on that is, let's get this right. All our dollars, it's the American people, are spent to bomb towns, villages and countries into oblivion. And then we pay Halliburton, Bechtel and other Neo-Hawks affiliated companies to rebuild it all. I mean, what sort of insanity is that? And why does so few of us see that as an issue? Have people forgotten governments and banks don't have money? They have our money, not theirs. 160 million on cruise missiles. That 160 million would have gone rather nicely into the foundation to help American people. Time will tell. So, look at this. The comparisons. Congress bypassed. Check. No corroborated evidence of chemical attacks. Check. Inspectors were on the ground. Check. Conflicting evidence. Check. UK and France involved. aka Rothschilds. Check. Mission accomplished. Check. Sound familiar? Back in 2013, Theresa May, UK Prime Minister, predecessor, tried and failed to get approval for military action against President Assad. There was international alarm then as now about his suspected use of chemical weapons, except there is no evidence. We all know the UK's dodgy evidence of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction which didn't exist. Well, the MPs at the time in the UK rejected David Cameron's plan, and he didn't try again to persuade Parliament it was necessary. This time, she has avoided that particular obstacle by taking action alongside the US and France while the MPs are away. Really? Well, for those of you who don't know, this is exactly the same as what happened in 1998 and Bill Clinton, not approving attacking Iraq at British request. And what? The comparison is eerily coincidental, or perhaps it's not. Out went David Cameron, who wanted to attack Assad, and in came the Nazi Theresa May. Out went Bill Clinton, and in came the Nazi sheriff, George W. Bush. And while we're on the UK, the nerve agent poisoning issue that has been pointed at Russia has been identified as a BZ toxin and is produced in the UK, not Russia. It's hypocrisy at its finest. And talking of hypocrisy, there was a speech by Vice President Mr. Pence on Saturday that, to me, at the time, displayed staggering hypocrisy in a message describing how chemical weapons won't be tolerated and how they should not be allowed in a civilized society. Really? Let's remind ourselves which two countries supplied sarin, chlorine, VX, phosgene, and various other nerve agents to Iraq, Iran, ISIS, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And also, which country used Agent Orange not only on the Vietnamese, but their own troops? Yes, America and Britain. But if chemical weapons are such a problem to Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence, I'm wondering when American bombers, along with UK and French bombers, are going to attack all DARPA facilities. Because if there's such a problem in one country, there's such a problem in every country. And not only rid ourselves of these awful chemical weapons, but actually save the American people money that costs $3.44 billion a year to run and operate DARPA. Or if chemical weapons used on the public is such a freaking problem, why are there planes in our own skies spreading chemical weapons on our own people? And why hasn't that issue been resolved? 15 months Mr. Trump's been in there and it's still ongoing. Why isn't it being addressed? There's not a single shred of documentation explaining to the people as to why that chemtrailing is happening, or why we, the people, are funding it. And this is further evidence of staggering hypocrisy. That America, it's perceived that no one can have nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, espionage tools, advanced weaponry except America or whoever it approves of. Unless, of course, it's a country of a huge size like Russia, India or China. You can't have one country controlling everything. Because if that country becomes corrupt, which it has been since day one, practically, courtesy of the British and the Dutch and the Rothschilds, then that's far too much power to wield. Now, Mr. Pence said him and Trump were proud of what they did in Syria. Time will tell on whether there was a alternative viable reason for doing that, which I will cover at the end of this piece. But proud would not be the word I would use. I would use the term cowardly, criminal, hypocritical, embarrassing, non-sovereign, abuse of power as more appropriate terms. Proud indeed. There's nothing proud or brave about firing missiles from hundreds of miles away with no guarantees of where they're going to land. I'll tell you what would make me and the public proud. How about we send politicians, TV stars, news media people and military's children into the chemical facility and arrest those working there and shutting down and then controlling the destruction of the said facility. How about we try that? That would be something to really be proud of. But as Mr. Pence said, chemical weapons have no place in a civilized society. Then get rid of DARPA. Sadly, the clowns have created a totally uncivilized society, and therein lies the problems we face. So that's what I wrote on Saturday. Now, of course, there is also a potential of a completely different spin on this information as well, as to why it took place. As the research facility known as NTI, which is the one that was hit in Syria, and the question remains as to why the following entities are directors or advisors of the said research facility in Syria, like Warren Buffett, Ted Turner of Clinton News Network, and Californian Governor Jerry Brownshire. That news could be, if proven, could be rather significant in the near future. And in essence, if that was the case, it also threw the UK and France, who are largely operated by the Rothschilds, under the bus as well. But this is the difficulty of the times we are in currently. The deeper we get into the mire of the filth, the more murkier the intel and the information on the ground becomes thin. So what I've done tonight is covered both aspects, not so that I'm covering my own bases, but because at this point, both aspects are of equal value. If we were attacking a rogue research facility, I still question as to why we're using all the public, American public's money, and other countries are not chipping in, where it looks like America and its people are rogues and violent, hell-bent on destruction of other people's countries. How about somebody else sharing that burden? Why is it always us? As time moves on, it will, as I suspect, become a lot more clearer as to what has taken place. I hinted last week there was a possible hint at Trump being corrupted in some ways by certain groups, the factions. There's a lot of threats going on. Sometimes in war, you have to make decisions that doesn't suit you or your overall agenda. But eventually, sometimes it's best to lose a few battles with the ultimate goal of winning the war. And speaking of Mr. Jerry Brownshire, yes, I know it's Jerry Brown, well, he is a Nazi. I see he's now relented and allowed the National Guard in California to administer border duties. Perhaps that was a response to the research facility smash. Time will tell. Right, let's get into the intel. The latest Rothschild's plan that failed again was to dump treasury notes and bonds and try and collapse the central bank. plus enhance their own missions. And they tried to gain treasuries for free from Russia and China. That failed as well. Then they called the treasury, or the treasuries that is in one of the Fed accounts, Federal Reserve accounts. But that was stopped as they couldn't prove that they owned the said treasury notes. Oops. Now the reality is the Rothschilds own nothing of note anymore. Zero. And more governments and more high-profile people are finding this out, and I'm beginning to believe. They owned, or thought they did, all that when they were part of the trust. They lost the trust. And rest assured, the trust is not going to allow them blights on humanity back into the game. We're just not. Now, the trust sent some money to the Treasury recently, which was partially for the wall and for certain other operations. I hope that money's being used well and not wasted in Syria. Like I said, time will tell. And the Rothschilds went to the US Treasury and tried to claim the trust money. Like I said, no one's listening to them anymore, the top end. And that failed also. But I'm going to ask the relevant authorities a good question on this show. Is why, when high-level fraud and corruption evidence has been presented to you now multiple times, and you've even witnessed it live, are you allowing these charlatans to roam free and cause no end of damage, waste vast resources and energy to counteract them? Wasted and lives threatened, and also lives lost. And yet you haven't acted yet. Yes, I know there's a lot of groundwork. But you have more than enough evidence to drag these people in. And the question remains as to why they haven't been dragged out of their homes and into cells. Inaction at this point makes you culpable, in my opinion. You have the evidence, now act on it. THI has decided to have make a special announcement tonight, and we've created a special award called the Look in the Mirror Award. And our first winners of that award is the Rothschilds, following their attempts to ring everyone in the past 48 hours, anyone who is anyone, or everyone who is anyone, and tell them Kim and the Trust are frauds. So congratulations to the Rotten Children on our Look in the Mirror Award, and we will forward that award to you, onto you, into the prison cell you will be stationed in when you arrive there. So look forward to the THI Look in the Mirror Award for the Rothschilds. Next one. Yet again, several hacking attempts were observed on the trust accounts in this past week to activate Operation Stupidity, more commonly known as the RV. And talking of the RV, apparently now it can only be signed off on by Mr. Obama. Like everyone's going to listen to him. You have to laugh. So you RVers who still follow that type of bullshittery will have a long wait for that, trust me. And Mr. Obama I hear your latest attempt to steal Philippine gold never worked out too well, did it? Oops. Seems the title of Pindar doesn't come with the guaranteed results anymore like it used to. It certainly seems to come with bucket loads of stupidity from the occupants, it seems. And now for the next humdinger pieces. You ready? The IMF is in a total panic this week, of which we will find out why in the next intel piece. The IMF has been threatening all central banks, presidents and prime ministers this week as a full-on investigation is now being undertaken to find any central bankers or ordinary bankers who have taken bribes from the UN, the IMF, or the World Bank. A full-on investigation to find any central bankers or ordinary bankers who have taken bribes from the UN, the IMF, or the World Bank. And here's the reason why. Yesterday and today, the final details are being done. But the bulk of it and the gist of it is now completed. Kim and the Trust, you ready? Sold the United Nations and all of its subsidiaries back to all the nations. The properties of the former UN was in foreclosure for non-payment of lesser fees by the Rothschilds, Rockefellers and the Asian families. The sale comes with a complete file to all nations of the orders done and the misuse of the organisation by the previous incumbents. A total of 108,000 files of intel against the operations of the UN was handed over to all nations as part of the selling and an equal share to each nation. Finer details are being worked out currently as to whether all membership fees paid to the UN by all nations are to be refunded, as in the original charter for the UN there was not supposed to be any membership fees. Of course, the USA people paid the bulk of the fees, just like NATO and every other war or operation. So what does this mean? Well, it means the next time the IMF or World Bank shows up at any central bank or president or prime minister's door demanding anything, they have the full right to turn around and tell them, we own you and you owe us X amount of dollars. Oops. And following on from my Bon Jovi concert last night, I'm going to play a song with a slight change of line in the song. So when the World Bank gets in my face, I say, have a nice day. Hi all and welcome back. I hope you liked that bit of intel. Rothschilds not getting what they want. No one listens to him. Obama not getting what he wants and no one's listening. And the UN has been sold. It has brought a raft of angry heads and threats. We expected it. The elite brats, don't like it being stuck right up them where the sun don't shine. They've done it for us for long enough, and now it's our day. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the highs and lows of being a radio show host. There are certain times when it's fun, and there's some news is just not. It's it kind of goes beyond words and descriptions. You run out of it unless you want to use a whole heap of expletives to describe the depths of depravity that some people, I'll use that term rather lightly, will go to enhance their own lives at the expense of others. But I observed a few things over the weekend that kind of leaves you sick to the stomach. And a line from an email. Please bring my hammer and toy I like to use to Comet ping pong tonight. Swing by the office and grab my inhaler. Nothing gets my heart going like a sacrifice night. Written by Hillary Rodham Clinton to Huma Abedin. Bring me my hammer and toy, and nothing gets my heart going like a sacrifice night. Now, the Clinton Huma video, is it real or is it fake? If it's real, would you watch it? If real, it is beyond comprehension. But I did try and soften it with certain information in recent shows. But the idea that someone would fillet the face skin off a young child and then wear it like a trophy in front of the still alive girl is beyond depravity. In fact, it's beyond words altogether. And then extract adrenochrome whilst the child is in total fear mode for their own sick needs. I've never advocated for revenge violence, but this news is proven 100% correct, and it's certainly leaning that way. Kind of stretches that opinion and stance to the limit. I understand many would want to repeat that behaviour on Anne and Huma. But the question is, should we stoop to their levels of violence and depravity? It's not really for me to answer that. But I don't think we have too much longer tolerating those beyond evil in our midst. And also now you know why no one from the off-world wanted them either. Now there are some who don't wish to face this type of truth reality The idea that you can get a young child and skin its face off while still alive and cognizant. Some can't or won't face up to it. And I do get that to a point. I think most of us are tired of sin eating. But being unaware of this type of criminality was going on is one thing. Knowing about it and turning away is another. Those children who have suffered terrible and awful ways of torture to create maximum fear did not have that opportunity to just turn away. We owe it to them and any future children planned genocide to speak out for and by them. It's our duty, I feel. I want people who listen to this show to ask themselves some honest questions. Are you frightened to speak out on this as your fear, or you fear the ridicule or the consequences of stating it? Be honest. And now imagine if that was your child being tortured, filleted and organ harvested. Never mind the sexual abuse. What would your reaction be then? The only way this ends, like the Monsanto being banned in loads of countries, the stopping police becoming militarised, stopping smart meters, stopping priests fiddling with children, all of which is what the alternative community has achieved, is to face up to it. It's happening, it's happened, and will continue to happen unless we the people stand up and say, enough is enough. Bollocks to the people who don't want to listen. What you're doing by disseminating the information, you're handing over responsibility to others. We've absorbed enough, as I said. I think we've overdosed on sin eating. It's time the synths and the City of Light people, where all the world is fantastic and everyone's nice, all love and light, new age bullshittery. It's just not. And so by putting the information out, the reaction is irrelevant. What you're doing is passing responsibility to as many people as possible. What reactions you get is irrelevant to the reaction of that child who's facing that terror. And if people want to go away and completely ignore it because it's not their child or it's not their family or it's not their friends, to me, are culpable in mass genocide. I'm not going to mix words, culpable. Because if you are told about it and you choose to ignore that level of depravity and sadistic, satanic behaviour, you are condoning it. That, in my eyes, makes you culpable. All you have to do is pass it on. Like I said, it doesn't matter what reaction you get. You know what reaction you're going to get. Bollocks to their reactions. Put it in their face, whether they like it or they don't. And remind them of their responsibility. Because it's every person's responsibility to end this nonsense. Now, I've covered organ harvesting a number of times since THI, the Haitian one, and also spoke about the Syrian issue last year. It seems this week it has finally been brought to the fore, and not before time, I might add. And some will have seen the video of the child screaming for her parents. This is not the same video about Anne and Huma. Her parents were being organ harvested right in front of her, and she was also killed. Complete sickening. And something most choose, like I said previous, to turn away from, either viewing or listening wise. You just cannot continue with that level of ignorance anymore. We just can't. I know it's painful. I know it's traumatic to see or hear. But unless we all face it and expose it, more and more of these atrocities will continue. Now, much work is being done globally to stop it. There's numerous arrests. I posted a site of like a trafficking site, and there's people being arrested by the hour in every country. Cells of traffickers and prostitution rings being broken up on a daily basis. Now, organ harvesting is one of the main reasons for the wall. Central and South American countries are and have been turned into a cash spree zones by degrading people's lives and forcing them to flee into trucks that they have to pay their whole life savings just to get on those trucks, only to find the death trains, death buses, all very reminiscent of the Nazi death camps in World War II. And people thought they ended there. Nope. Courtesy of Operation Paperclip and Overcast, we imported those same sadistics to run amok in this country as well. Of course, it's kind of gone into overdrive over the last decade or so, with engineered weather events, engineered earthquakes, engineered famines, and engineered biowarfare events. Alongside war on terror, that is spelt T-E-R-R-A, not terror, it's war on terror, as in war on us. It's a play on words, which is why the war had no ending. Remember Mr. Rumsfeld? And what that's done, it's led to an enormous upheaval of people from their homes and into migration status. This fills two agendas. One, particularly in the Middle East, it sends them into Europe to collapse European economies so the Asian families and the Rothschilds can dominate financially for the next 100 years. And it also served as removing as many people as possible from the Caliphate region I first warned about 5 years ago. I read about it in the 1990s. And it's all about the so-called gods trying to reclaim their former land and build a wall around the whole area. People didn't like that idea when I put it forward back then, but I think many are now trying to see it potentially unfold unless actions take place. Maybe the Syria action was one of those to prevent it. Yes, the area known as Israel is prominent. The name tells you that. Isis, Ra, El. It's all about the gods, you see, and their chosen ones. It's funny, the Anunnaki were also self-titled as the chosen ones as well. Wonder why? But let me make this clear. This is nothing to do with the people of Israel, the general people. They are just as much, if not more so, pawns in the game. Just don't think if they get their caliphate, they're going to keep Jewish people behind that wall. They're not. They want them all gone. Look at the map again. Palestine, Israel, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, southern Turkey, and draw the line. And like the MK Ultra style program members, some of which we have in the community, keep telling people, or they're told they're special. Sadly, it leads to more exhibiting poor behaviour than not. Being told that you're more special than others. Plays into the ego and goes to people's heads. Give them a simple title and suddenly they think they can goose step over everyone. All bow down to the king. No. All bow down to nobody. The idea someone's more important than you is a fallacy that isn't. And the day people stop giving their power away, will be a day that this planet becomes totally free. The Elites, and I call them, for those new to the show, it's elites, but it's L-ite. L means God. Isis, Ra, the solar god, and El means God. That's where Israel comes from. The Elites all think they are above or better than us because that's what they've been lied to and led to believe. One day, that self-titled specialness will get rammed so far down their throats they won't be able to see it. And the meek will inherit the earth. But whilst some are now getting knowledgeable about harvesting and how they achieve it, there is one category of people that has been left out or overlooked: the homeless, or some call them the street people. Easy targets, as very few people are bothering to look for them or after them. Otherwise, they, by and large, wouldn't be on the streets. Remember last year? I know many will have forgotten, because there's that much to cover, that much to remember. During the hurricanes, of all the thousands of disappearing homeless, where are all those people now? Probably in the same camps that were in Arizona. Death camps. And you think this is a new phenomenon of organ harvesting? There was reports back in my hometown in the UK in the 1990s of not only homeless being taken, but people passed out drunk on the sidewalks, only to wake up in bandages, blood covered, and missing a kidney. Many thought of it at the time as some sort of a prank or practical joke, as it's barely believable. Someone stealing a kidney. Well, when those kidneys sell for between $90,000 and $175,000, suddenly it's not so unbelievable, is it? As people will go to desperate lengths to make money. But the reality was, it wasn't, and it isn't a prank. It is real, and people should leap over the control boundaries of what is believable and what is not. Society itself has dictated what is normal, believable, fantasy or fiction, which leads to closed minds and a wall-off of the truth. Now we've learned of its reality, let's not wall it off again because we can't handle it. One day it might be your child or family member that's being filleted, organ harvested or trafficking. We cannot ignore when the children cry.
Well,
White Line and When the Children Cry. I'm hoping that type of, like I said, it's beyond description really, is ended soon. There's more than enough evidence, you know, even if you just take them off the streets and wait for the evidence. You know, they often arrest people on suspicion. Why can't we arrest these when there's more than suspicion? People who have the clout to do so need to act, and quickly. You know, there's a lot of distraction about memos and Comeys and he said, she said. But I don't think anything, in my opinion, is more important than saving these children from this type of behaviour. If it means the trust accounts get held back, so that we save all the children, so be it. We had some alternative media news now. We had a return of the famous or infamous, depending on your opinion, Gene Haynes this week with a narrative in reference to Neil Keenan, David Wilcock and Michael Saller. You know, I have done it before, and I'll repeat it again. I was kind of harsh on Jean, but I didn't like the way she went about things. There was elements of Jean's behaviour that wasn't good either. Yes, I'm sad that Neil Keenan, allegedly, I don't know the full truth, it appears he took a lot of money off it. He took a lot of money off Drake also. But Jean thought she could buy the love of a married man. That rarely works. That was Jean's goal. And she was also promised a string of salons in her name in every state. That's service to self. But I did play a role in partially defending Keenan. And so I have to hold my hands up to that. And it probably caused some unnecessary grief to Jean and Denise. And I have to accept full responsibility for that, and I will. But there was extenuating circumstances surrounding what took place in Cosmic Voice. I went against my own intuition. In the October of 2013, I'd only been a show host for 3-4 months, so I was kind of new, you know. And when you first get into this, you get into, you know, I'm on the same show as Drake and Tanath. They were kind of well-known figures, and then you realise when you stand in your own sovereignty to know better, bigger than you are. And I warned Drake in October that I thought Keenan was rogue. And Drake turned round and said he had vetted them and not to worry about it. He's good, okay. Well, like I said, I was new. But Keenan didn't make sense to me. And the minute he announced he was the M1, which is more bullshit, and then it is telling people he needs 20 grand to go into the vaults. The M1 paying to go into the vaults, and yet people fell for it, including Jean. Jean collected the bitcoins, $8,000 of people's money. That wasn't Jean's money, that was the people's money. And yes, it ended up in Keenan's pocket. And he used it for prostitutes, young ones, and copious amounts of alcohol. I was personally witness to some of the behaviour of Neil Keenan and his team. I watched Neil Keenan drink a whole litre bottle of tequila in roughly 20 seconds and then smash the bottle on the hotel floor deliberately. That's the type of behaviour Neil Keenan exhibited. What I didn't know is the money he was drinking was Drake's. I warned Drake not to give him any money, and Drake swore blind to me 3 times that he didn't, and then admitted he did. Remortgaged his house to keep Keenan afloat in $10,000 a month hotels, eating at the top restaurants, all at the people's expense. So I'm pleased in some way that Gene's come out and not in others. Because she also played a role in it. She went too early with the information. Once it became clear that Neil Keenan was not going to respond to her advances, that's when it went sour. Nothing to do with anything else. Keenan had a 47-year-old wife. Why would he be interested in a 70-odd-year-old grandmother? He was only interested because she had money. And it is sad. And I'm hoping one day she will get her money back. But I'm not entirely sure that Neil Keenan's still alive. The original, anyway. Well, it remains to be seen what Gene has to say, whether it's relevant or not. In light of what's going on now, I don't think it's particularly relevant. And there's also been a mention of Corey Goode. Now it's coming up to conference time again, spitting out a whole pile of shit, basically, and promoting a guy called Gerald O'Donnell. More money. And apparently Mr. O'Donnell does remote viewing courses. Mr. O'Donnell worked for the agencies, and he's charging 174 or 447 for remote viewing courses. Well, Mr. O'Donnell, I remote viewed your courses and found them to be a whole load of bullshittery. Okay. Don't need courses to do that. And we have to be careful, and self-included at this point, of spending too much focus and energy on the likes of Wilcock, Corey, Keenan's. They are low-level pawns, and their exposure could be used against the alt media to take the focus off the bigger picture. I think that's what's playing out here. Wilcock, Corey and all the others are getting exposed, so people focus their attention on those reprobates and forget what's really going on in the world. The high-end game is now in play, and the focus should be on that and not low-level coven operators. And that includes Mr. Sather. Yes, he may be cute and all that, and he may present his show rather well. Where do you think he's getting his information from? Robert David Steele, another one of that entourage that includes Wilcock, Corey, Drake, because I have to include Drake for the simple reason he will not out any of them or go against any of them. That makes him complicit in my book. Fulford, another one. Robert David Steele, for those who are new to the show, went over to visit Neil Keenan after I exposed him. And Neil Keenan went very quiet. Why? Because when an asset like Keenan is exposed, they rarely last too long after that. Compromised assets are removed from the picture, and Robert David Steele took over where Keenan left off. So, Scott Pruitt is a name that's going to come more and more into the news items, as he's found money funneled by the Obama administration through the EPA. And you're going to hear a lot more about the Democrats and Obama were using the EPA as a massive slush fund for deep state antics. Now, $2 billion in settlement money was missing. Most people will not be familiar with some of the documents going back. It was probably 5, 6, 7 or 8 years ago, where I was witness to Vatican Bank accounts. And guess who had the exact same amount that was missing? $2 billion in the Vatican Bank. Yes, you, Mr. Obama. Which got confiscated. But before it was confiscated, people might remember Michelle, or Michael, depending on which one you want to believe, also had $1 billion in that same account in the Vatican. Tony Blair also had $1 billion. And she removed it from that account and flew to Spain on her own, which the press thought was rather odd at the time, and deposited that $1 billion in her name into Bank Santander. You're going to hear a lot more about slush funds and Obama and a whole heap more. Like I said, which do we cover? Or do we try and cover all of it? Maybe we'd need a nightly show, and no, don't ask. It's bad enough to cover in one show a week at the moment. Here's a little known fact. The Clintons' time in the White House. Were you aware that Anne, when they left the White House, stole $200,000 of furniture, china and artwork from there? Wherever she goes, she steals, she plunders, tortures. Just pick her up now, whoever that may be, Anne, or a double, or clone, whatever it is, just get it out of people's way, once and for all. Right, let's get on to some Q&A. If the soul is tied to a physical body until the last remnants of flesh have rotted or burnt away, does embalming trap the soul indefinitely? If that's the case, could embalming be considered a punishment in some circles? Good question, and I'm not too sure I have the answer on that. It is possible. I still think the actual soul leaves, but it may also be considered a trap and a punishment in some circles. Of course, where did the embalming start from? Yes, the rogues in Egypt, or what is now known as Egypt, with the felinoids and the crocodile people, reptiles. They're all there in the hieroglyphs. Up to some very, very sinister acts. So that's a good question. I would say it still goes, but it has perhaps a longer journey. Maybe. You said Kim is sovereign. Yes. Is this because she came from a sovereign place? No. Does it depend on a country or a place one lives or comes from? No. Again. Is there a difference between the status as a sovereign, as being in sovereign? I live in the Netherlands. I do not have a status as a sovereign, birth certificate, etc., but feel I am sovereign. Well, it's a good thing in a way that you feel that way. But sovereignty comes with a massive responsibility. And yes, it gives you certain rights, but not at the expense of others, technically, as far as I know. But there's a lot of people going into certain courts and filing for sovereign. And I've repeatedly said, do not go down that road currently. Yes, one or two may have got it, although proof is never too forthcoming. But there's an awful lot of people that end up getting arrested because A, they don't know the full legal term to describe it, and B, the courts are corrupt and know what you're doing or what you're saying and just block it and end up threatening people. If you're going to continue with that, I will have you detained for whatever. And people have been arrested. It's like people saying, well, you don't need a driver's license, and technically that is 100% correct. You don't need a driving license in America. But you try telling that to a cop, they're not going to buy it. Not only are you going to get a ticket for whatever you alleged to have done, you end up getting thrown in jail for the night for resisting arrest and not providing documentation. We can't do that. Now, if everyone did it, fair dues. Are they going to arrest everyone? But everyone won't do it. So it gets left to the few who are challenging the system, and therein lies the problem. But there's nothing wrong, back to the question, with feeling that you are sovereign. Well, as I said, it comes with a personal responsibility, which sadly too many won't administer. But please don't go around telling authorities that you are sovereign. It doesn't turn out well in most cases. Does sovereignty have something to do with going somewhere after death? No. The chemtrailing here in the Houston, Galveston area where I live is still ongoing like crazy on a daily basis. The false flags going on here in Texas are even worse. I wonder if this has to do with the fact there seems to be a lot of us that are really awake and in tune here. Or is it just because we're in bush territory? Could be a mixture of both. I don't know whether Texas is more awake than any other state. They certainly defend their rights, perhaps more than other states, or certainly perceived that way anyway. I'm curious how you feel about the Yellow Rose of Texas. I had the pleasure of getting to know her personally about 4 years ago. Back in 2013 and 14, I dismissed it because it was utter rubbish what was being put out. There was elements in it that was okay, and there was large elements in it that were just not. And I was asked a question, and Drake was, and we both said the same thing. Then in 2016, I think, Yellow Rose for Texas, whoever she is, came out and did an apology that she'd been stating wrong information based on her sources, and those sources were removed from the equation. And so I looked at some of her videos, and chunks of it did resonate. Oh, we've all made mistakes, like I said before. Technically, I supported Neil Keenan. Privately, I didn't. For the public viewing, that's what I did. But I had to wait. Gene and Denise went far too early on Neil Keenan, and he didn't have a lot of clout to do it. I had to build up my own popularity before I took Keenan on. Because you end up, because he was a personality, you end up getting swallowed in the personality stage. And the worst thing Gene and Denise did is go to that clothhead in, what's it called, the Pisswater Report, or whatever it was called, Goldwater, Pisswater, with his staged hats and looking like some out of a failed B movie, like anyone's going to take him serious. But if Keenan's still alive and Gene wants to get her money back, I hope she does, but I wouldn't count on it too much. So Yellow Rose for Texas admitted she made a mistake, and some of her, or chunks of her information she was getting at the time was declared wrong. And the recent interview videos I've seen are rather interesting in many aspects. What date and year did Hillary allegedly pass away? September the 4th, 9 p.m. on a Sunday night, 2016 was when I got the call. Ever heard of the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan? Yes, it's the original Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030. And the person who said if you read it, you think this guy belongs in a nut house. Yes, most of these psychopaths do. Some of them do. In my opinion, shouldn't be alive, but there you go. Until you discover that Angela Merkel and Van Rompuy won the Kalergi Prize for their work for Pan-Europe. Yep. Ms. Merkel, Hitler's daughter, as I understand it, same thing. And by the way, it is going on, and it is being ignored by the media and politics. You see the plan is true and well on its way. This is destroying Europe in a fast way, and I'm sure this all goes on in the big cities and no one has ever heard of this lunatic plan. Well, like I said, it was the precursor to the Agenda 21. It won't work, and neither will Agenda 2030 either. Their time will come to an end. In essence, it largely has now. Yes, things are still ongoing. But like, if people need reminding, the piece I did before at the end of the news about what we cover, and then you think of all the man hours and all the resources required to investigate all those things and bring the people down that are committing these crimes. How many people can go around visiting every church and interviewing all the people who've made complaints against priests? Or the banking crimes, the bribes, as mentioned in the intel. They're now seeking out a full-on investigation of all central bankers and bankers who have taken bribes from the UN, the IMF and the World Bank. That's going to take some time and a lot of investigation and a lot of processing to then deliver what we ultimately are looking for, is mass arrests of these people. Everyone will say, will have their own particular desire to end X, Y or Z. Well, I want stopped all water fluoridation, or I want organ harvesting and children abuse stopped. To me, that comes before anything. But everyone has a different way of looking at things, and therein lies the problem. It is taking up vast resources, and in all 209 countries, on so many aspects of life. Like Kim said, there's 489 different aspects of life being looked at, investigated, decided upon, processed, and then delivered to whatever end it comes to. Now, it would be nice if the funds were released and more people could get involved in that. We could move along a lot quicker. Currently, Kim's working pretty much round the clock. UN sold in the last 48 hours, dealing with us Argentina banks last week, sold the China banks the week before, Wells Fargo, still ongoing about returning the funds to Russia that was stolen by the Citigroup, and that's just the banking. Who investigates all the politicians? Who's going to investigate all the FBI, all the CIA, all the Departments of Homeland Security, or the NSA, or the Texas Rangers that were involved down there on the death trains? Or who's going to arrest all the MS-13 gangs? When people start asking, when's this getting done and when's that getting done, you really don't understand the depth of what's really going on this planet and how much is being uncovered already, and how much work investigating and processing every single aspect of it, because it all has to be dealt with. That's the new directive. Like I said, it'd be nice if we could get funds and we can get more people stuck into it, being paid to adjudicate these things. Can you please speak more on any intel on Australia? I live here, but everything seems to be surrounding America. We don't hear a lot about Australia. Well, I covered some of Australia tonight. I gather that once things come out in America, the rest of the countries will follow suit, pretty much. Like I said, it appears to be tailored towards America because 2 of the 5 factions are based here. There was 3. And it's kind of the focal point of the world elite stroke cabal. And yes, they're in every country, including Australia. Particular politicians over there are not particularly too nice either. And hopefully there's people within Australia that are routing out the criminals in there. I think it'll be safe to say that there's some working underground over there. They have to work underground as there's a rather nasty place in the middle of Australia that has some rather unpleasant entities. So apologies, I don't cover too much to do with Australia, but I do try to bring you as many countries as possible. I did cover Australia tonight, but the actual focal point of most of what's going on, be it banking, be it the fraud, the corruption, the cabal, the factions, the bulk of it is in and around America. Now, are America the source of all ills? Well, a lot of people around the world will say it that way because they're not educated enough. But the reality is this is an institution that doesn't really affiliate to certain countries. Because otherwise I could sit here and blame Rome. Well, do I blame all the people of Rome because of the Vatican? Or do I blame all the people of Britain because of the British Empire stroke Vatican Empire? Or do I blame all the Dutch people for the goose stepping they did all around the world? No. They're not interested in countries. They're not interested in Australia. They're not interested in America. They're not interested in Britain, Canada, or anybody else bar themselves. And the best each country and its people can do is work hard to improve yourselves and the people around you. So when the time comes to step in to the shoes of those who have failed you, you can step in and do it in a better way than they did. That's why we focus on stuff to do with the shadow sides. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with the same levels of stupidity and ignorance, going into the same positions with unbalanced egos, and it going to their heads the same as the cabal. You know, what would be the point of taking all this nonsense down and then putting unbalanced egos and people only interested in becoming millionaires, etc., and trappings of wealth? It'd be a complete waste of time. We have to do it in a better way. Think and act different. That's the only way things improve. And because we've all been damaged in various ways, all countries and all peoples, some worse than others, it depends on perspective. The biggest thing anyone can ever do is work on themselves and get themselves into a better state, a better way of thinking, and a better way of acting for themselves and the people around them. The last thing any control structure wants is the people standing in their own sovereignty with a clear mind and a clear heart. Cabal can't stop that. You never could. And the people themselves need to stop creating their own boxes. The cabal put enough hurdles in without adding your own, of what you would like to hear about and what you wouldn't like to hear about. There's no choice in that. But this is movement is all or nothing. We won't get a second chance to get it right. We mentioned that back in when I did the Future of Humanity show in the summer of 2014 or 15, about what happens or what didn't happen was that the end of humanity at the end of 2012. Technically we'd already won, but it's how we're going to go about claiming the victory and how we're going to go forward as a species. Either carry on being childlike, which is essentially what we are, or act proper adults and take this planet and its people forward with a proper knowledge base of learning, with an abundance of the basic needs, not the trappings of wealth and fancy cars and gadgets and the latest iPhone this and P-phone now, whatever they're called. It's all seducements to take you off your path. So this kind of rolls into the next question. You're telling us that we have to deal with our shadow sides, and I was thinking and wondering, what exactly is the origin of evil? Where does it come from? It comes from within. Oops. Yes, people can largely say, well, it was the devil, it was Satan, it was Lucifer, it was this and it was that. But there's some very, very dark and evil and sadistic and satanic humans on this planet currently. Why? Because they allowed an imbalance within themselves. Everyone has a free will choice. I know most people don't think they don't have free will. There's not enough of them, enough people exercise it. But you have the ability to be the ultimate light being, for want of a better word, and the ultimate in dark as well. It all comes down to choice. Well, I'd never get involved in evil. You can never say never. There is people who have, even in our own group, who were not admittedly nice people when they were younger, and yet they are now. So even in one lifetime you can be good or bad. I don't imagine a number of the people that take part in ritual sacrifices thought, I'll go and do a sacrifice. No, they get seduced into it by other things, generally wealth or fame. And it's far too easy to seduce people in that manner, and that's why we have to do and deal with our inner work and our shadow sides, so we don't go down that path. And this is why I've spoken about being 55 to 45. You can be 55% dark and 45% light, or the other way. So if you need to correct it, you've only got a 5% swing. You can be overexcitable or depressed. But if you're 55, 45 either way, again, You only need a 5% swing to bring you back to the balance. But if you're one of these people who goes from heightened excitement and then hear one piece of news and go into depression, you're going 90-10, 10-90. You've then got a 40% to bring you back into the balance. That's not easy. And that's where people lose it and end up on psychotic drugs and all kinds of dodgy pharmaceuticals to pull you back into the balance. And that's why it's so important dealing with your own shadow sides, integrating your shadow, doing your inner work, deal with the trauma, your own traumas, or what you may have caused trauma to other people. Deal with them. Because if you don't, they fester, and then you are then susceptible to seducements to ignore that shadow side and become even darker. And I can hear people, no, not me. Yes, you. Each and every one of us, including myself, has the capability to be dark or light, good or bad, nice or evil. It's all in us. And it's all down to how you react. So evil comes from within. Are you able to control it? Is the key. Does our own universe create the evil itself, or does it originate from somewhere else and invaded our universe? Well, there's aspects of that to do with the fractal virus that Tanath and Chloe have spoken about many times. And the theory behind that is this particular universe was created with light only, free will choice, only light, so it couldn't perceive darkness. If that was the case, that free will and that choice was a bad one. Because if you're all light and you can't perceive darkness, how are you going to know when it's around you? Well, it's not possible. We've created an all-light universe. And then it festers, and then it goes too far balanced the other way before people react to it. You see that in general terms. There's always got to be a bit more before people believe, like proof. You give proof. Well, I'd like someone else to say, well, they've said it now. Well, how about them? Well, if blah blah comes out, then I'll believe it. You keep creating those boxes of proof and truth, then that's what you end up with. So if that theory of the fractal virus, and from all accounts that is correct, you can see how free will and a lack of balance doesn't work too well. Because from all accounts, this whole universe was going to be pulled, so it didn't affect the universal tree. This universe is but one branch off the main tree. Well, if you've got a virus and it's going to infect the rest of the tree, then what do? You cut the branch off and hope you save the rest. But if that's correct, 90% of this universe was dark. Some thought they could save it. If that is correct, as I've said, then that saving is well underway. But it should have been over by now. God, there's loads of questions left. Does the quantum computer have the ability to access and freeze the looting of local government financial systems in towns, cities and states known as CAFA? I have a feeling that they will be dealt with one day. Like I said, it's all about priorities at the moment. Question for Kim Possible. She won't have time to answer questions, but those 8 institutions that I mentioned are part of the problem of the overall control system. You know, these are the very institutions that we as society is supposed to look up to, be it the police, teachers, doctors, nurses, judges, lawyers, politicians. And yet all of them have elements of dangerous levels of corruption, fraud, and ways of not. Social workers was another one, of not looking after the people they're supposed to do, or educating them in the right way, or curing them, or fixing them in the right way either, or serving justice. I was quite shocked to hear on the last show that since Kim's offer of sovereignty went out to 200 plus countries, only America has accepted and qualified. No, that's not correct. That's not what I said. I said America and the Kingdom of Manor, known as Manus Island. Can you give us an update as to why there's not been more? Is it cabal leadership blocking? Some countries are being threatened. In fact, all of them are being threatened. Inability to meet conditions. I don't know the full details on that. Or are some making serious efforts to comply? Qualifying is just timing. The last bit I would agree with. Do you have any information on a possible planetary star system that is right next to us currently? Orbs that look like planets are being seen continuously on the FAA cameras in Alaska as well as other places. What if they're not planets? How do we find it in our being to forgive those responsible for crimes against humanity? Depends on what levels of crimes. The ones I've talked about earlier. Crimes is too light a word. Being both an experiment and a simulation creates a permutation of the two. It would have to take an end to the many millennials' control of duality upon humanity to bring transformation through dissolving of the matrix. Does this inherently mean there was never a God to begin with? No, there wasn't. The gods are the fake ETs acting as gods. Everything to do in reference to God is more likely to do with ETs and some previous versions of humans who just think themselves as gods, and everyone should bow down and worship to them and give them their life force energy over to them. The Lord, as people know it in the Bible, is Anu, the Draco King reptile. Now, I prefer to use the term source. Source is within everyone. You are source. And that's kind of, again, where people box themselves up, going, what, just me? Little me? No, there has to be someone more powerful than me. Says who? The cabal? The Elites? The Clintons and Bushes? Not really. Is Trump more important than you? Not really. He's doing an important job. But he's not more important than you. Nobody is. Nobody's above and nobody's below. And when humanity finally gets that, a lot of this nonsense that we've tolerated and put up with will completely vanish. And then you're really standing in sovereignty, or being sovereignty, like the person asked the question before or earlier. How can you be sovereign if you're giving your power to a god, a lord, or Trump or anybody else? You got to understand the meaning of sovereignty. So, forgiving those responsible. There's certain crimes that are unforgivable, as we've covered in tonight's show. People stealing, fraud and corruption, yeah. Everyone's done it. Hey, Thomas, I haven't done it. You're not telling me you haven't fiddled your taxes, please. Everyone's done something. But there's levels of criminality that go beyond against what it means to be human. Yes, those gods and the elites, if you look up the term in the Black Dictionary, the term for human is monster. That's what they think. And the key is the ones that aren't acting like monsters stand up and say, we don't want you in our society. Turning away from it because it's painful is not the answer. We've turned away because of our own ignorance, because we weren't aware of those crimes for far too long. It was going on. Now we know we have an obligation. And yes, they should be dealt with humanely as possible. Spilling blood on this planet has serious consequences, far more than people realise. Let's not spill the blood of monsters. No matter how much we may want to do that. You end up getting yourself into a state, when I mentioned earlier, where you go out of balance. Vengeance takes you near to the 80-90% range. What if you happens if you get stuck at 80 to 90% and your vengeance and ways of wanting to deal with these people become stuck? You're then on the path to being dark yourself. So I hope now people get what I've been talking about long enough, about the 45-55 balance swing. Never go too high, never go too low. Stay in the balance on a range of things. Then if you go off balance, it's only 5%. Most people can deal with that. You can't deal with one swing, because once it carries on, like the darkness in this universe, it just kept on going. Once people become depraved, it's like pornography. I spent time talking about that. There is benefits to it. There's also a lot of nasty elements to it. and abuses. But you may watch one thing and you get hooked on it. Next minute you're watching people whipping each other. Where does it end? Bestiality? Incest? Once you start going down the wrong path, it just keeps on going. And that's the danger for us all. You can all think you're love and light, but everyone has the capability to allow it to run away and go the other side. And it all happens too quickly. And that is why it's so important for people to deal with the shadow sides, do your inner work, be better for yourself, service of the self, to then be service to others. Right, I think we should end on that. Apologies for the questions I didn't get round to, but we had to cover quite a bit tonight. I'm surprised I got through as many questions as I did. But I'm going to, someone posted on the MeWe an excerpt from Pao Chang's book, Word Magic. And it kind of plays in to the message I've been stating over the last hour. And it is as follows. Stop relying on a saviour to save you. The saviour ideology was created by secret societies of the dark forces to enslave your soul. When you rely on a saviour to save you, you are basically telling the universe that the Prime Creator did not give you the spiritual powers you need to achieve spiritual freedom. This is an insult to the Prime Creator, of which you are part of. If you need to rely on a saviour to save you, you are not using your spiritual powers wisely, and in essence are thinking like a slave. Let's not do that. Let's all stand up and be the crown of creation and go forward with the confidence of who and what you are, excelling yourself and inspire others. As I've often said in that my own piece I wrote. In essence, tonight's show was the high of the UN being sold and the Rothschilds being trampled on again. The IMF and the World Bank, like the Federal Reserve, rendered pretty much powerless. Will we see the full-on evidence in a public arena? Maybe not too soon, but maybe it might be. It only takes one announcement. Depends which announcement you're looking for at the end of the day. Right, I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I'm going to end on a song which perhaps everyone should observe and remember. You're the voice. Just me. You as well. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.